In these next two videos, we're going to be focusing on the releasable group abseil. This is a really useful skill set if you're taking novices abseiling or if you're going for the rock climbing instructor qualification. What we're going to look at in the first video is how we've created this and a few of the things that we need to be mindful of. And then in the second video, we're going to show you 4 different ways of creating a releasable group abseil. And with each one, we're going to give you some context, which we hope will shed some light on why you might pick one method over the other. Now we have a nice little Blue Peter moment, and here's one I've prepared earlier. We're just going to talk through the system you can see here, as it has lots of common elements that you'll see throughout each of the techniques that we're going to show you. Firstly, I've got multiple high anchor points, and we're going to chat about those in a wee while. They've been brought together using a semi-static rope, and I've created a high central power point up here. That power point you want at head height, or ideally even a bit above. And that's just going to make the takeoff for your students so much more pleasant, and it'll do wonders for your success rate getting people to abseil. At the bottom of the power point, I've got 3 loops. Into the outside one, I've clipped myself with my rope lanyards. Into the middle, we've got the releasable abseil. And then on the outside, I'm using a dynamic climbing rope as a backup. It's going to be a safety for people as they're heading down. You can see here that the safety rope is on the outside of everything, and it can move around. It can't get trapped in the center. And the loop is a little bit longer, allowing the crab to sit free of everything. So I'm not concerned here about any sort of abrasion that might happen with this rope being tight with the abseiler's weight on it and that rope running, because it's going to stay fairly free. If I did have that loop a little bit shorter, I might be concerned about the issue of abrasion between the running Italian hitch here and the one that's been tied off. Now, if I'm only sending 1 or 2 people down the abseil, maybe it's not something I'd be super worried about. But if I've got 10 enthusiastic students, I'm running an afternoon abseiling session and they all want 2 or 3 goes each, then there's certainly the potential there for quite a bit of abrasion. It's really easy to keep that loop a little bit longer and allow that freedom, and it then eliminates that hazard for me. So it's something that I always make sure that I do. Right, so that's our first technique. What we're going to do now then is have a look at how we tie all of that together. Before we get stuck into that, it is worth mentioning all of the other decisions that you will need to have made before you can even touch a rope. So things like your venue selection, the actual line that you're going to send your clients down, all the way through to the minutiae of the group management at the top and at the bottom of the venue. Now, these are really important matters that you need to have taken into account. So much so that we're actually going to save those for a whole different dedicated video. In the next 2, we're just going to be looking at different ways of rigging this system. The first system we're going to have a look at then, we saw in the introduction there, and it utilises something called a BFK, or a big fat knot. And the context with that would be that I've got multiple anchor points, and we're just going to chat about those in a sec now, but 2 of them are quite close to my final working area, and then that's going to allow me to be able to go there and back with the rope and equalise things quite straightforwardly, rather than having to do that quite a long way away from me. The other reason could be that I've got only 2 ropes as well. I haven't got a separate rigging rope. So I've got my semi-static here, and I've fixed the end of that the anchors at the back, and then I've brought it forward, and I'm now going to have to use this one rope to create that power point, but then also to utilise for the abseil itself as well. So this works quite well. This system works quite well if you've got to take all of those things into account. Anchor points then, we're going to emphasise how key they are with abseiling, just like they are with anything that you do with climbing. But there's a few things here that we need to be extra mindful of. The first one is that there's 2 lives properly hanging on this potentially. So I've got the abseiler, definitely, and then I'm going to be clipped in with my lanyard, and quite a bit of the time I'm going to be leaning into that and looking over the edge just to make sure that everything's going on as it should be as they're heading down. So that's 2 people clipped in and weighting the system. The abseiler, as a novice perhaps, or somebody that's not done a lot of it, can be less than smooth when they're playing the rope through the figure of 8 device. And that means you get a bit of jolting coming up through the rope. It's almost like they're bouncing a little bit. And that can be for the whole way down the route as well if they're a little bit nervous. So that shock is going to get transmitted up the rope into your central power point and then back to your anchors. So each one of them needs to be really good. For me, however, it's the last thing that's the one I want people to think about most. And that's the fact that despite your best efforts, you're going to notice that occasionally your abseiler might track to the left or to the right a little bit. Now, it doesn't take much movement on their part for one side of the belay to then become unweighted, and the bulk of their weight, and possibly yours as well if you're there with your tight lanyard, ends up on just one side of the belay and possibly 1 or 2 of the anchor points. So what we want to make sure of is those anchor points are large, so big trees, big boulders. If I am putting in traditional protection, then I'm going to put in big sizes, and it's not uncommon that I'd put in maybe 1 or 2 more pieces than I would for a top rope rig. Next then is my safety. So I've got this rope attached to a big tree and a boulder back there. That's the end fixed. And I've come down into my working area, so I want to get myself attached to this rope so that I don't go over the edge. I could clove hitch myself into it, but then that's going to interfere with my rigging. So what I want to do up here is pop a French prusik in and attach my rope lanyard to it. Depending on the thickness of your prusik cord, you're going to want 4 or 5 double wraps. Keep them nice and neat. I make sure that this prusik is cinched up nice and tight on the rope. I might well go for maybe 1 twist more than I would to protect myself for a personal abseil if I was using a prusik in that context. So here I can test it. Yeah, works well in both directions. And you can see if I pull on the rope above, the prusik doesn't slide down. It's actually quite tight and compact. Remember, these can slip though. They can catch you by surprise, particularly if they rub against anything, against the rock, against the floor, or perhaps the trunk of a tree. So you still need to be quite cautious with one, but it certainly makes me feel quite safe here in my back garden. So get your prusik on there, and then a safe lanyard is a snug lanyard. So I'm just going to push that up there so that it's going to be out of the way of any of the rigging that I'm going to do down here. Next, I'm going to go into both my anchor points and do the screw gates up. Going to leave the outside strand on the outside for now. Not going to worry about that too much. I'm going to focus on the 2 inside loops, and they're going to create those first 2 loops of my power point. I want that at about chest height, because once I put in the overhand knot, it will bring it a bit higher. And I'm trying to keep them nice and neat, not too many twists. Then going to pick up the outside strand, double it over, And then we're going to extend that away so it's a little bit longer. About a hand span works well. And I always tend to do that with the outside strand because it's easy to adjust it, either to make it smaller or make it a little bit bigger. I don't have to pull the rope all the way through the carabiners. I'll keep that nice and neat. Slide my hand up to just above where I want the power point to be. And I need to be mindful here that my prusik and lanyard isn't pulling it offline, so I might just move myself across, maybe take the tension out of it just a little bit, but don't have a big loop of slack in your lanyard. And then the other thing I need to think about is the actual line of the abseil. I don't just mean the direction where people are actually going, but the fact that when they lean back, the belay is going to come out like this, and you can see, because I'm pulling down here, as I lean back, this rope then goes soft, but that's actually where the load's going to be, so I need to just tweak that one, figure out which one it is, there it is, and get it snug. And this is one of the issues with the BFK, is you do have to work quite hard to get all your tensions correct. So now I'm just going to tie an overhand knot on the bite. It will be a little bit of a fight with the semi-static rope, so let's give that a go. You can see I'm trying to keep the loops quite big here as I pull it through. I'm not just doing it with my fingers, make life a bit easier for yourself. And then before I cinch all of it in tight, I'm going to put things where I want them. So I want that tail rope round the back. That's my longer loop. I like that on the right hand side, so I'm just going to neaten that up. Untwist those two. Yep, that looks nice. And then I'll cinch it in tight. And because it's a BFK, you can get weird things going on here with certain strands of the rope. You maybe get gaps or things like that. So it's important to pull every strand just to cinch the knot in nice and snug. Work your way around the knot. Great, there we go. Happy with that. I'm going to get myself clipped into the power point now rather than hanging out on that prusik. Slide that down here, and depending on how threatened I feel, I could just unclip and clip back in. If I'm at the top of a wet, windy abseil and I don't really like the idea of that, I can take a loop up, spin the carabiner, and then just pop that into there, close it, and then take the prusik out. A safe lanyard is a snug lanyard, so I'm just going to pull that in so it's not got a big loop of slack in it, and then I can remove my prusik. You might have noticed with my lanyards I'm using a twist lock carabiner on the end there. I quite like that. It just means I don't have to worry about remembering to screw it up all the time, so that works for me. It's just a simple one, there's no buttons or anything, you literally twist and open, so yeah, not a bad idea on the rope lanyard, works quite well. Next then, I'm ready to get the other elements of the system in. So I quite like colour coding my crabs. I'm going to put in a blue boa here for the abseil, and then a red one for the safety rope. Boas here are great, nice big HMS carabiner, and the large head here just allows the Italian hitch to flick backwards and forwards without jamming. So quite a fan of those in that spot just there, they work really well. So that's cool. Next, we need to think about getting the abseil rope down. Now, what I will have done is briefed a responsible member in my team about what to do. At the minute they're standing out the way, I'm going to coil the rope up and throw it down the cliff. They can then approach, and I'm going to get them to find the end of the rope, stand underneath the line of the abseil and hold it by their knee. They're then going to give me a shout, and I'm going to pull up all the spare rope. What it means is the tail of the rope then, it's going to hang about 30 centimetres off the ground. Now don't worry, your students aren't going to abseil off the end of that. So even with a semi-static rope, there's still quite a bit of stretch. and what will happen is your students will touch down on the ground and they'll probably have to take 2 or 3 steps backwards before the tail then pops out of the figure of 8 on their harness. And that's a really nice thing to happen to them at that point, because it means they don't have to fiddle around with carabiners and things like that when they're probably still feeling a little bit of an adrenaline rush from the abseil. So that's a bonus for you, one less thing for you to manage. Another point with it being just off the ground is there's not going to be any loops or coils resting in the mud or on any sharp rocks for those students to grind in with their feet as they touch down. So that's good as well. And then the other thing is if the tail is on the ground with a few loops above it, you know, a few meters of rope sitting on top of it, what you'll find is after 2 or 3 people have gone down, you're going to start to get a little bit of a twist coming up from the ground. And the more people you send down, the bigger that twist becomes. And your students then are having to manage that with their figure of 8 at the point when they're the furthest away from you, when they're towards the base of the abseil. So that's not great at all. It's not nice for them. So just think about how you're going to manage things so you can get that tail just about 30 centimetres off the ground. So I'll coil that and throw that down. Right below. Yeah, that's great, Mr. Leary. If you can just come into the bottom of the cliff there. That's it. Yeah, fab. Pop it by your knee. Great. Okay, I'll pull up the slack now. Give me a shout when it comes tight. There we go. So what I now need to do is to tie the abseil rope off. And I'm going to use an Italian hitch with a slippery hitch and 2 half hitches to do that. And it's going to go into that middle crab, that blue crab. So there we go. I fold it like a book at that point. Pop it in here. Nice. Now then, it's quite important that the Italian hitch is on the side of the carabiner that your abseiler is on. It wants to be on the same side, so it's loaded in the direction that they're going down. If I didn't do that, if I didn't flip it around like that, and it stayed on this side, even if we tied it off really tightly, when the first person leans back, the whole system sort of stretches as that Italian goes over the top of the crab. And that's fairly unnerving for that person as they're starting to lean back a little bit further than they're expecting. So do make sure that you've got it pulled through like that. Going to get that cinched in really tight now. Get rid of all of the gaps that you can. You've got to work quite hard again with the semi-static to do that. And then I want to tie it off. To do this, I sort of think about there being 2 parts of the rope now. That's the abseil rope going down the cliff. And then this is the reservoir rope. This is the spare rope that I've got here to help me resolve any little problems that might occur. So I'm going to take this rope and just go round and straight up where my fist is. See that? Hold onto the abseil rope at that point and pull the loop through. And I pull through a good arm span. At that point, I'm going to grab those 2 ropes in my right hand and the loop in my left. The loop I pull up to the sky, and the other 2 ropes I'm pulling down to the ground. And get this cinched in as tight as you can. Right, so now I've got 2 ropes going down and 2 ropes creating the loop. I'm going to tie 2 ropes to 2 ropes. I'm going to use that fist as a guide again, look. Like that. So that's we've got the slippery hitch was in first, just underneath the Italian. That's now the first of my half hitches. Cinch it up nice and tight like that. And then again, 2 ropes to 2 ropes into that. You can see how sort of neat I'm trying to keep that. Just avoids any slippage, which is going to make everything a lot more pleasant for your students. I've got a tail now. I could leave that dangling, but I've got quite a lot of semi-static rope dangling down here. and it could get confusing perhaps. So all I'm going to do is get a different coloured crab and clip it at the back here out of the way. I'm not going to do it up, it's not a primary attachment point, but by having it there, it just means that I can identify where that loop is should I need to release the system at any point. Do be mindful that you keep a loop between that crab and the back of the last half hitch. If I clip it in up here and maybe the system stretches a little bit and that goes tight, you've now got a unreleasable abseil, which is not much use to you at all. So do make sure that you keep that down here somewhere and there's a nice healthy loop of slack there. Last then, I just need to get my dynamic climbing rope in there for the safety. And that again is going in with an Italian hitch. And you can see with that one there, we've got that nice healthy separation and that's hanging nice and free and can move around. Some people will put the safety rope on a long loop in the middle and the tied off abseil on the outside. It doesn't really matter. As long as this rope is nice and free and isn't getting caught in things, I don't think it's a mission critical thing at all. Just practice and see which one you prefer. I tend to like doing it this way. I've kept my figure of 8 and the stopper knot really small, and I've kept the loop here really small, and I tend to use a smaller carabiner, screw gate carabiner here as well. I just don't want any big loops or bigger crabs that could maybe get caught around anything. It's usually some of the biggest issues that you have with abseiling, so just keep everything nice and neat and then you're not going to have any issues. Great, so that's technique number 1. We're ready for a student now to come on in, so they'd come up with a figure of 8 device and we'd get them to load it on the rope, or we'd do it for them, and away they go. The only issue, I suppose, with this setup is getting all your tensions right. It can be a little bit of a fight, particularly if those anchors are a little bit further away. Is there another way of doing this then that makes that a wee bit easier? Of course there is. Let's have a look at another technique. This is going to be our second one.